Ron DeSantis has officially announced his highly anticipated candidacy. So where does the 2024 presidential race stand as more candidates from both parties make their bid and voters start to align themselves? It's never too early to take a look. So here to paint a picture with us after the latest Quinnipiac national poll is Professor Scott McLean. Scott, thanks so much for being here.
It's great to be here, Emma.
So we saw quite the spectacle this week on Twitter Spaces as Ron DeSantis announced his heavily anticipated campaign for the 2024 race. Clearly, the race is shaping up in the GOP at least, but the Quinnipiac poll released numbers, which look like despite that, it's still a two-horse race in the eyes of voters right now. Do you think this will change now that we've seen DeSantis officially enter the field?
I think once someone is officially in the field, it does change the situation. The gloves come off, the campaign begins. It's no longer exploratory. It can become much more attacking and finding weak points in each campaign's platform and issues. I think there's a lot that could happen between now and when things really start heating up. Around, after November, sometime in this fall, there are, every day there's a new surprise in the news. We have the Trump indictments, but we also have the DeSantis situation sort of taking on Disney Corporation over some issues in Florida. Disney is not just rolling over and taking it. They are responding. So it's a very dynamic situation. And we still have the debt ceiling debate. What will happen there? Will we default on the debt? So many things could happen. It's really not much purpose in looking at the polls right now to determine what's going to happen 6 months from now.
Gotcha. Definitely fluid, a lot of different factors in this situation, but there is a lot of talk about who's a stronger candidate to go up against President Biden's reelection bid. Some say DeSantis might have a better shot. He's currently governor, and including Quinnipiac's poll right now, I know you said it's still a little bit too early, but with how DeSantis set the tone this past week, what we've seen as the campaigns take off, I know it's really early to judge, but do you have any inclination on who you think might take the Republican primary spot or who might be the front runner?
I think Trump is the front runner, of course. Trump is. And DeSantis really had kind of a stumbling opening announcement on Twitter. It was supposed to show that DeSantis is more with it and more technological. He got Elon Musk to be a part of it. Didn't really reflect well on Musk or DeSantis. There was a hot mic situation, dead air, a very sort of flat presentation by DeSantis because he was on the phone and not really talking to people. Traditional launch of campaigns is in front of a large mass of followers and an exciting, rousing speech. DeSantis took a very he was tough. He attacked the woke left and all the things that he has sort of staked out as his territory. But it was a little flat and it didn't work out the way he planned. But look, Emma, the way this is likely to come down is a big question. Once DeSantis and Trump really begin to compete, and they're competing with collections of pretty much the same voters in the Republican Party, that will be a big question mark because let's say if Trump wins, will DeSantis supporters support Trump or will they go for someone else? If DeSantis wins, will Trump supporters vote for DeSantis? There's no way of knowing this. The polls right now show that those two factions of the Republican Party are fairly interchangeable and that there are some people who will support DeSantis. DeSantis does just as well against Biden as Trump right now in the Quinnipiac poll. But all that could change. Lots of dynamics of the race will maybe mean that those voters won't necessarily support the other side of the faction.
Right. We could see maybe some splitting of votes and Republican voters there. But on the other side of the coin, you mentioned, and we saw those numbers, that both DeSantis and Trump going up and doing equally as well against Biden. So in your opinion, is Biden really the Democratic shoo-in that he's being treated as, with who's entered the race so far right now, which is not very many people?
Well, there are already some what we might call sort of outsider Democrats who are running
Right.
against Biden right now. We have Kennedy and Marianne Williamson, both out there campaigning. They're more symbolic campaigns than really serious contenders. They're not the people that one might have expected to be serious challengers for Biden. So, but they are there in case Biden stumbles or something bad happens to, tarnish his appeal to voters. But I look to a lot of other signs. If you look at the debt ceiling vote in the House of Representatives, for example, every single Democrat voted to deal with the debt ceiling, really strengthening Biden's hands in those negotiations that are going on with the Republicans in the House. You're not really seeing major moves by people like Joe Manchin, who have floated the idea of running as a third party or an independent candidacy. That's in the wind, but we haven't seen serious steps that way. And you see good support for Biden among Democrats in these early polls. They do really question his age and wonder if he is really strong enough and capable enough to go another 4 years as president. But as long as nobody else is running, it really does give Biden an inside lane for getting the nomination. And, in some ways, the Republican race is far more interesting, as it usually is with the out of power party in a presidential election year.
Right. So we've been talking about these political polls, and obviously Quinnipiac has a nationally renowned polling institute, but there's always a lot of questions as to why they matter and if they're really all that accurate. When we're looking ahead to 2024, we're looking at these polls. Are they really the best tool that we have?
Well, I think, and it depends on, there's a lot in your question there, Emma, because at this early stage, polling organizations really try to find a baseline where a candidate's initial support and strength really is. What are the favorability numbers for both candidates, and then we start watching as the election and the campaigns progress to look for any changes. Every poll is just a snapshot in time. They don't predict the outcome of anything. But when you put a snapshot and a snapshot and a snapshot over time, you do see movements, just like you might with a film or something that are also just a series of still snapshots. But we try to find out where the trends are going. At this stage, the one thing that voters can pay attention to, and that what I pay attention to, is the favorability numbers. Both Biden and Trump and DeSantis have very high unfavorable numbers that people are just not excited about the prospect of voting for these candidates. And so one thing to look for is, do those numbers change, especially among independent voters who really are going to hold the balance of the election in their hands as we get closer to Election Day. So watch what they begin to do, where the splits are there. I think that's really important. Right now, they also are split between Biden, Trump, and DeSantis. And they're watching what will happen in the news. And as they begin to pay more attention to the election coming up, that will change. One last thing. I know I've said a lot there, but one last thing to pay attention to is that these early polls are basically just registered voters, but not all registered voters will vote. So as we get closer and closer to the election, you'll notice that the polls begin to look at likely voters, people who, pay more attention, who say they're going to vote, who have voted in the past. And those kinds of numbers will change the outlook of the race in the polls. So those are important things to pay attention to for, the average person seeing these numbers in the media.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, watching how polls change. And obviously, we still have a lot of time to do that, as it's still a while before the 2024 election. But some local elections before that comes as well. But, it does sneak up on us quickly. And here in Connecticut, both the Democratic and Republican parties are making a bipartisan push to move up the primary date in time for the presidential primary. They say it's important for engagement and could mean more money for the state when it comes to campaigning. So in your opinion, how important is the primary schedule and where it falls for different states?
It's tremendously important. It may not be important in 2024 because, as we've just been saying, Emma, it looks like Trump is likely to get the nomination for the Republicans unless something weird happens, which it could, and the same for Biden. So, on one level, when Connecticut has the primary may not make a great deal of difference in selecting the delegates to the convention that formally nominates the nominee of each party. But as far as media attention, as far as future elections, when it may very, very much matter, and also Connecticut, if we do have this in April, it will mean that we will be in that sort of critical March, April time when things really will get competitive and we really will see the outcome. And certainly Connecticut will not make the difference in who will win the nomination all by itself. But we will be in a band of states that will be highly important in that next phase of the nomination process, which happens sometime in March and April. So it's prime time for Connecticut. It's a prime time for voters to pay attention, and very important that we are finally moving our primary closer to January, February, and not in April or May, as it has been in other years.
Yeah, well, definitely a lot to watch here as we look ahead to 2024. Scott, that does it for us, but thank you so much again for being here.
Great talking to you, Emma. Take care.